the thing about those, let's call them free sporting events or free gold medal events, if you want to have those world champions come to your hometown as the riders ride through the Glasshouse Mountains, that's where you live, and the world champions are coming to you. So there's this really interesting dynamic in terms of the sports that we've got, from the marathon to the walkers to the road cyclists, even the mountain bikers. To have that calibre athlete running in your area, your suburb, maybe even your street. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Welcome to the countdown of the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games on the Sunshine Coast. As we mark this exciting milestone, it's time to reflect on the power of sport to bring people together and create meaningful change. Over the next decade, we'll be witnessing the transformation of our region as it prepares to host some of the world's greatest athletes. But it's not just about the games themselves, it's about the opportunities and legacies that come with it. So join us as we embark on the journey and explore the impact that the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games will have on the Sunshine Coast. This is the Podium Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Podium Podcast, and today we're going to be talking all things Olympics and Paralympic Games from Paris all the way through to 8 years and 2032 here on the Sunshine Coast. Now, to do that and give us a real official view of what the build-up looks like and where we are in the process for 2032, we got the program lead from the Sunshine Coast Council, Grantley Switzer. Good to see you, Grantley.
Good to be here. Thanks, Francis.
What a great job you have.
A few people have said I've got the best job in council.
Yes.
It does feel like that at times. It's not all beer and skittles, but it is for someone who has had a lifelong passion for sport and also a professional career working in a lot of sport and community venues. It is pretty much a dream job.
So how does a passion for sport then turn to the city that you're working for hosting some Olympic events in 8 years' time?
Yeah, so it's a good question. In terms of, I came to the Sunshine Coast about 10 years ago and was our manager of sport and community venues. So we're looking after a lot of our, as the title suggests, sporting venues, but also dealing with grassroots sports clubs and so forth. That's been my career for the most part of the last 20 years. So when Brisbane was awarded the 2032 Games, and particularly Sunshine Coast awarded a number of events, we had to gear up within council, so it's probably one of those right place at the right time type of gigs.
Well, you got saddled up to a passionate mayor about the Olympic Games. 2014, he started the journey with all the other mayors, presenting this regional bid, which is going to be so different to anything we've ever seen before. Is it still trying to be interpreted? How do you do this with 7 mayors and the state government and the federal government? Because there's about 6 more stakeholders and delivery partners than there usually is. Yeah,
it's been and it still continues to be quite a journey in terms of, as you said, having 7 official games delivery partners. So often we have to work with our counterparts in state government and federal government. So we're kind of used to that, but you put in the overlay of Paralympics Australia, the Australian Olympic Committee, through to the International Olympic Committee. So there are a lot of partners involved. There has been some manoeuvres, throughout the last 2 or 3 years. But we have got pretty much a good governance structure established now. Obviously, the Independent Delivery Authority was established a little while ago, but now has stood up only a couple of weeks ago. So that's been one of the good things is getting to really work closely with a lot of other, whether it be local government partners or state and federal government. So those relationships are really good, but we've got a lot of work to do in the next 8 years.
Did you want to talk about that, Fran? We were talking about the $290 million, I think, that was allocated recently. That's from the review. So the review's done in January.
Yep.
Were you a little bit nervous about the review? Because I've been through some of the partners, some of the local government partners, and it seems to me on the outside that the Sunshine Coast were early movers, early adopters. The grand plan was put down. The argument started with different groups, where the basketball stadium should be and things like that. But we had this grand plan on the Sunshine Coast that was presented to the other partners well ahead of time. And when I've viewed the other partners, they're nowhere near sort of the advanced stage that you're at. So did the review in January scare you?
Wouldn't say it scared me. You always have a little bit of trepidation about what might come out of it. But the good thing is, and as you said, Duncan, we're early movers in this space. So when we started the journey, for example, for the outdoor stadium expansion, we started that back in 2015. an indoor sports centre. We looked at, identified the need for an indoor sports centre at about the same time. And similarly for our nature-based recreation precinct, which will host the mountain biking, we started that, I think, in about 2017 with initial investigations. So by the time we got to the announcement in 2021 that we were hosting the games, we kind of had something in the top drawer ready to go, which I think was really helpful compared to maybe some other areas which were said, okay, now what do we do? So, and as a result of that, there's only been 4 projects that have had the official sign-off from the federal and state governments, and for lack of a better term, with the money in the bank, and they are the 3 Sunshine Coast projects and the Chandler Indoor Sports Centre. So 3 of the first 4 Sunshine Coast projects, which gives us a great opportunity, all going well. By the end of 2027, those 3 venues will be up and running, which is 5 years of pre-games legacy for our community, opportunity to test the venues for events. But the most important thing is our community can get access to the indoor, the 11 courts at the Indoor Sports Centre. They'll be able to go to events at Sunshine Coast Stadium. The mountain bike centre will be open. So we'll be cutting the ribbon on, the first, I think, venues for the 2032 games will be cut here on the Sunshine Coast, which is pretty exciting.
Wow, we're winning. Winning in terms of the local government area in Queensland.
To use the Olympic analogy, we're the blocks, which is really good. So it is quite exciting in that sense.
And we've got the 7 sports locked in now?
Yeah, it's yes. Well, actually, no. Locked in, and Duncan might be able to talk to us a little bit more. There is a venues master plan which has those 7 sports coming to the Sunshine Coast. But what's really interesting is that there hasn't been we've just got to be mindful of history. There hasn't been Olympic Games where, 3 years out, even, particularly I think Tokyo was significantly impacted because of COVID. But every other games, there's always some manoeuvring within the venues master plan. Even to the point in 2025, that's when the sports for actual 2030 games will be announced. So the program isn't finalised 100% as yet. For example, the 3 S's, surfing, skateboarding, sports climbing, they're actually not formally part of the 2032 program. You'll notice they haven't been allocated a venue for 2032. That'll happen in 2025. LA brought in 5 new sports. Cricket, squash, baseball, softball, flag football, and one other that escapes me just now, and lacrosse. Are those 5 sports in LA in 2028 going to be there in 2032? So there can still be sports and even disciplines within the sports that can come in and out of the program between now and 2032. So we're watching that very closely to see where there may be even further opportunities for the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah, I was going to say Surf Lifesaving has put a huge push to get the boats here in Queensland. Is that something that...
Yeah, no, absolutely. In terms of, I know Surf Lifesaving Australia are working, and I think there's a number of federations who are in constant contact with the ISC. Interestingly, it is... And LA have bucked the trend. Usually the cap for Olympic athletes is 10,500 people. And that's kept at that cap. There's some financial imperatives and the size of your villages and whatnot. LA have brought in another 600 or 700 athletes, and they said, don't worry, we're going to bankroll that. So
because it's a complete corporate games.
Yeah, it is.
They're not actually going with government.
It's the private games, you could call it.
Yeah, the privatisation of the Olympics.
So traditionally what's happened is if you bring in a sport and you might be bringing 100 competitors into that sport, something else has to give, and 100 competitors from another sport or discipline have to come out. LA have chosen to ignore that, so there's going to be some decisions that need to be made around what the 2032 program ultimately will look like.
Because we're doing a hybrid model, aren't we? We've got some private and some government, or are we all government?
Predominantly government.
Okay.
Yeah,
so we're going to cap it at 10.5.
Yeah, and that's the early indications that it will be 10.5. So already those 5 sports. Cricket's the other one that's coming in at LA too. So those 5 sports, the success may be determined, in 2028 whether they survive.
Make the cut.
And a good example was, skateboarding, surfing, and sports climbing, hugely popular. They went really well in Tokyo from a broadcast point of view, very popular sports. So it's a big call to be able to take those out. So when you have those conversations with people saying, we're going to be a 2032 sport, it's easier said than done.
Well, back to Fran's point, we've got 7 sports now,
Yes.
but it's almost like there's going to be horse trading between the councils because some councils missed out. Some councils are very, very large councils, like next door neighbours, Moreton Bay. They've got one sport and a bucket of money. So depending on where the sports lands, everything that you've just described, which sports make it, how many in the village, it sounds like a lot of horse trading has to go, but the master plan that we have is getting ready for 7 sports.
Yeah, and our indications so far are that Brisbane 2032, which is the organising committee, the OCOG, and our other partners at state and federal level, are pretty comfortable where the venue master plan sits. But a lot can happen between now and 2032. That's why it's really important for us, particularly with those 3 built venues, is to get, regardless of the games, that funding's now secured, and we can start using. But I'm pretty sure too that you're not going to have a federal and state government who are investing in venues and not have events there.
That's right.
For 2032. So and we think we're really positioned. We'll put on an amazing, like the marathon. To pick up the marathon is an amazing event.
That was one that Tom Tate really wanted.
Yep.
wasn't it?
And we'll put on an amazing event here.
Amen.
On the
Of course.
Sunshine Coast.
Yep.
Similar with the road cycling, with the time trials and the road races. They're our ultimate postcard moments, in terms of showing those venues to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say we have the sports that are really going to showcase the Sunshine Coast to the world. Is there much collaboration now with the tourism boards of how that sort of will look?
Yeah, we've started those conversations, and we particularly Visit Sunshine Coast, in terms of what we're doing here locally. And so we've got Matt Stokel, who's the CEO of Visit Sunshine Coast, and the board of Sunshine Coast. We're talking to constantly because they see this as the moment. And whilst having events at stadiums, our Sunshine Coast Stadium would be great, and our indoor sports centre when we host basketball will be terrific. I don't want to be disparaging, but a soccer field's a soccer field, a basketball court's a basketball court. It is those events that are out, in the public where we will be able to showcase our beautiful coastal areas, the Glasshouse Mountains, our hinterland, our Maroochy River, lots. So it is, and the Tour de France is on now, and you see how well they do that in terms of their postcard and their vignettes and whatnot. This is people who may not have heard of the Sunshine Coast are going to be seeing it, and we're talking about billions of sets of eyeballs.
Exactly, and the thing about those, let's call them free sporting events or free gold medal events, if you want it, to have those world champions come to your hometown as the riders ride through the Glasshouse Mountains, that's where you live, and the world champions are coming to you. So there's this really interesting dynamic in terms of the sports that we've got, from the marathon to the walkers to the road cyclists, even the mountain bikers. To have that calibre athlete running in your area, your suburb, maybe even your street. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, and it is pretty cool in terms of we all know getting tickets to go to Olympics events. They're hard to get, and they're not cheap.
No.
So it is, and I'm sure when you were competing, Duncan, you would have had a long list of people saying, "Can you get me a ticket to here? Get me a ticket to there." And it probably still happens now.
And you never know, there might be a market there. Not that I've exploited it before, but every 4 years there seems to be a fair bit of excitement of what I can procure. But anyway,
exactly. So the good thing about those road, whilst if you want to be on the finish line at Alexandra Headland, there'll be areas where obviously you'll pay a premium to, but once they get out of that staging area, you might have, like I said, the world's best cyclists and runners coming past your driveway.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay for it. So the opportunity to engage our wider community in those road-based events is something we're really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's switch to the Olympics that is happening at the moment. When this goes to air, you're going to be sipping champagne locally in Paris. What are you hoping to learn there, mate?
Yeah, so in terms of the trip to Paris, there is an official IOC Observer program, and Paris City Council are also running a Host City Experience program. So whilst it does, I don't know about the sipping champagne part, but whilst
you'll say no.
Whilst there'll be some networking opportunities.
It'll be a cultural exchange. It's okay.
Yeah, a lot of my time will be spent actually in the Paris Organising Committee office, where we have it's like going back to school, where we will be getting first-hand almost lectures from the International Olympic Committee and also Paris Council. And they'll be talking us through, city operations, communications, transport, security, a lot of these things that we need to be planning for now. Like it always is a tricky one for when you have government officials heading overseas. And we're there on the public purse, so we've got to be cognizant of that. So it is looking at the itinerary. There's full days and a lot of learning. So whilst we are 8 years away, and it seems like a long way away, there are so many things that we have to do within the next 4 years, and we'll of course engage in LA as well in 2028. But there's some really good learning. So we're having a lot of calls already with Paris, particularly the Paris Council. The Paris Council is a bit bigger machine than the Sunshine Coast Council, but they're dealing with the same issues that we're going to be dealing with in 2032. So there's some really good practical learnings for us. And for me personally, in that role as program lead for Sunshine Coast Council, I've been lucky enough to go to some great events. I've never been to an Olympic Games. So and everyone I speak to is, unless you've been, the scale and the enormity and the complexity of the event is it's hard to fathom unless you're actually there on the ground seeing what's happening.
This just for you to get you in the mood, to get you excited, to get you going for your first Olympic Games. Fran, you would have so many great memories in terms of what Grantley's talking about, and the heaving nature of a Games in a city like Paris. The Olympics that you attended, and did you experience that too? Because we were in the bubble
phenomenal.
of the athletes.
So Athens Olympics was just incredible for the history, the pure history of going through all the remnants of early Greek era and what have you, and the Olympics, modern day Olympics, first time there. So I guess there was that history element there. In saying that, wasn't the best organised games. We arrived in the village and they're still planting the olive trees on the entrance to come in. So there's a lot to be learnt, I guess, of how other cities have done it and how we're going to do things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an example. And again, this sounds like, because I love sport, and one of the sports I happen to love is basketball. And so the Mayor and I, the Mayor will be in Paris as part of the Olympic family for the first 6 days. The Mayor and I, on day one, the day after the opening ceremony, travelling to Lille, which is an hour and a half out of Paris. And we're going to travel by public transport, so we can have a public transport experience. We're going to use the app, to actually, which is your wayfinding in your vehicle. So we're going to so we're going to a regional venue to watch basketball, which is exactly what people will be doing in 2032 in heading to the Sunshine Coast to a regional venue, an hour and a half out of Brisbane to observe an event. So trying to bring back some of those learnings and experiences, what works well. And again, the public transport's a perfect example. In terms of France has got a much more sophisticated public transport system, but it'll be interesting to see.
We'll have a newer one.
We'll have a new one
by 2032. Ours will be brand new.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So even you think you talk to people about the benefits of hosting the games. Obviously, we had some announcements made around $5.5 billion worth of investment into getting passenger rail to Caloundra. Now, we'd love to get it to Maroochydore. Ultimately, it should be coming where we're sitting here. Through to Batinia and then all the way through to Maroochydore. But I can't help but wonder whether that $5.5 billion would have been forthcoming if there wasn't a 2032 deadline to be able to start moving people around southeast Queensland much easier than what you can now.
Yes, the compelling date of the Olympics forces a lot of these decisions into reality. So it's into Caloundra at this stage. Then what?
Yeah, so the intention is to obviously get it all the way to Maroochydore. And now this is a federal and state government funded project. From what I'm led to believe is that it's actually physically impossible from a timing point of view to get it all the way into Maroochydore by 2032. There is a chance it could get to here to Batinia Kawana, which would be great for our obviously Kawana Sports Precinct, which is hosting basketball and football. But even being able to get the people to Caloundra, then we need to work on how we move the people around the Sunshine Coast, getting them to the venues once they can get to Caloundra. from what I can gather, nearly every bus in Australia will be in southeast Queensland.
It will be.
So, suggestions that, I'm not sure it's a suggestion or whether it is reality, is that definitely in Queensland they'll be changing the times of school holidays. And I think the whole of Australia will probably have their school holidays dates changed to reflect around the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So we'll have all these buses and whatnot working around. But if we can get some better infrastructure around our Sunshine Coast public infrastructure, our transport infrastructure, whether it be bus rapid transit or dedicated lanes. They're not just there for the games, but they can be there to encourage people to use public transport on a more regular basis than what is now. Cause
it's one of the legacy points, isn't it, that Sunshine Coasters will have a new transport system to be able to get around the Sunshine Coast and maybe leave their car at home, whether they're working, playing or visiting.
Absolutely. And whilst it'll be great for the 16 days of the Olympic Games, what it could deliver as a legacy would be just as important. The Olympic Games are really important because we don't want, I spent yesterday on the Bruce Highway, and we've all been there.
We've been there.
We've all been
swearing.
there.
The Bruce Highway.
Yeah, and it's that could make or break in terms of, during the Olympic Games, reputation of the Games in its entirety, but also specifically for the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah, the nightmare of ticket holders missing their events because of the Bruce Highway, officials not getting there, the athletes not arriving. We saw that in Athens. We saw it in Atlanta as well.
Yeah.
So many gold medals were burnt on that rail system and things like that. So we don't want that, and we're not going to have that, and we've got the next 8 years to fix that. I guess another thing we want to talk about with the legacy of the Games and the compelling nature of the Games coming is the universal accessibility opportunity for all of us, with the Paralympic Games being so showcased both in Paris, Los Angeles, and of course at our own, the Brisbane Games. What are some of the plans we've got for universal accessibility?
Yeah, so a good starting point, and it's a really strong focus. If you see any of the documentation coming out of Brisbane 2032 and the document which is referred to as Elevate 2042, which is the 10+10 legacy, there's two overarching or underpinning themes around that, and that is around the accessibility. And the other one is around engaging with our First Nations people. But it particularly the accessibility part. So we're putting that into play right now. So we're well into the design phase of our 3 venues. These will be venues that have to be provide greater accessibility than what we've got. So use Sunshine Coast Stadium as an example. Whilst some people said, we're going to lose the hills because we're building a grandstand. The hills are great, but not if you've got a disability. So in terms of your limits, you're very limited to what you can engage in at Sunshine Coast Stadium. It's just again a legacy of the past. In that respect, the Sunshine Coast Indoor Sports Centre, a great opportunity, and we're putting that into design and working with some of our local Paralympians around what does a really good first class accessible a venue of 2024 look like. And similarly with the Mountain Bike Centre, looking to bring in some adaptive cycling components so people with a disability can experience mountain bike riding. So absolutely there's that built infrastructure, but then we're also looking beyond what is going to be the experience for people with a disability who may want to come here, again, not just for the Olympic Games, at any time. So some of our public spaces, how people can move around. We've done a little bit of work, but that'll probably ramp up around dealing with our local service, like particularly hospitality providers. So where can you, if you have got a disability, what kind of hotel, what's the offering here on the Sunshine Coast? It's pretty limited. If you go to a restaurant, it's quite limited. So absolutely 2032 is an opportunity for us to really dial that up in that space.
And then also you've got sustainability. We are the Paris Games is carbon neutral, and then we've got Sunshine Coast 2032.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the aspiration, for Brisbane 2032 to be a carbon positive Games, and given our geography and our proximity, you ever think of all the people that are going to be flying here and the emissions that go into that? So there is a fair bit of work underway at the minute to say what does a carbon budget look like? But again, all of our 3 venues, 6-star Green Star, which we haven't got any of our community venues at 6-star Green Star. So that'll be incorporated into the design. So they're all, whether it's the waste management systems, even in the construction, taking out if you go to any construction site or most construction sites around Australia now, the machinery on site is being, generated using fossil fuels and that's out for these 2032 venues. So, and whilst that does probably increase the upfront capital cost, the costs in terms of our emissions and how we operate them, proper waste management systems, renewable energy components within those. So, again, 2032 does provide that impetus, or almost it's imperative that we've got to have, those 6-star Green Star venues. So that is another opportunity absolutely out of 2032.
So we've talked about accessibility, we've talked about public transport, we've talked about sustainability. We'll get on to First Nations in a minute. But which out of the 3 is the most challenging to address at this stage, 8 years out?
I think probably the one we're still trying to land on is probably that sustainability, in terms of...
Is that the most unknown?
It is a bit unknown, yeah, and it's also... what if you are going to have that aspiration to be net zero or carbon positive, what goes into the carbon budget, and what doesn't get included? Like I said, if you use the flights as an example,
jet fuel.
It is you can tick a box now when you buy a ticket. But is that going to be included in the overarching 2032 carbon budget? And what's going to be the mechanism for offsetting that? So. I'd say we've got a really good line of sight on. We know what we need to do to be more accessible. We've got a pretty good idea of what we should be doing in terms of First Nations engagement. The sustainability part is probably where there's just so many moving pieces out there at the minute.
Sailboats,
this is it.
Sailboats.
And you're actually taking someone over to the games who has that sustainability expertise, aren't you?
Yeah, and that's a really strong focus. We've got 2 spots on the official observer program, Sunshine Coast Council, as a co-host city. So in that first part of the observer program, there's some really strong focus around environment, sustainability, carbon positive, the whole circular economy piece, and because we are Sunshine Coast Council, we're a UNESCO accredited biosphere. We actually also spent the head of UNESCO is in Paris, so that's not part of the program. But the mayor and myself and our manager of environmental sustainability will be heading to UNESCO to have a chat with those guys as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we've spoken about Paris, we've spoken about all those sort of things. One of our unique propositions here on the Sunshine Coast is our connections to First Nations peoples and how strongly that connection runs through everything the council does, really. That's going to be one of the great showcases of 2032. I'm really excited about that space. And it's grown on me because I'm only a 3-year resident of the Sunshine Coast. So I've gone through this incredible education in terms of how important that part of our culture and our piece of living on the Sunshine Coast is. It's really going to affect, I think, the Olympic brand if we can do it right.
100%, and it is, as I said, in Elevate 2042, that's one of those underpinning themes is to celebrate the world's oldest living culture. So that is something that is unique to us. We've, through our Legacy Community Reference Group, and I know through Sunshine Coast 2032, there's already been some great engagement, in terms of with our Cubby Borough people. But there are some opportunities, and probably the one that I see personally is our Sunshine Coast Mountain Bike Centre, which is on country, and it's a spectacular site at the foot of Mount Ninderry. So there's some great storylines there. So we've already had those conversations with our Cubby people. There is, you can imagine again, those conversations and the commentary as the riders ride up into the Glasshouse Mountains, and a chance to be able to tell the story of the Glasshouse Mountains, not just to Sunshine Coast people or Australia, but to the world. So I think there is some great opportunities. A lot of work to be done in that spot. Like I'm not going to sit here and say listen, we've absolutely nailed it. We know exactly what we're doing, but there is a strong commitment to that engagement into being able to really tell that story to the whole world.
It kind of invokes what the tour, like you mentioned before, the Tour de France coverage does for the incredible French countryside, the French culture, the French history. We get a chance to do that here on the Sunshine Coast with the 2032 Olympics. Now, Fran and I, we've had a bit of experience at the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games, and now we want to get involved, okay? Mm. And I think we are indicative of a lot of people on the Sunshine Coast who have been listening to the Sunshine Coast Council talk about what we're planning, what the strategy looks like, who's going to be involved. We've been speaking for about 30 minutes now in terms of Paris kicking off. So how do we get involved now? You know, I know you're looking for people in 8 years' time, and you're going to need a lot of us, right?
Yep.
But what can we do now? You know, what does the council need? Does it need us to sign up as volunteers and get our passport going? Does it need us to, go and join a sporting club? Do we start? What do we do? How do we get involved right now, Grantley?
Yep.
Where do we look?
Yeah, I think the most important part is. I think is getting up to speed and getting knowledgeable, on the event and being, and we're pretty like our sentiment on the Sunshine Coast is really good. So
what's that? The website? We go to the website.
So go to the Sunshine Coast website. There are some opportunities, but I think grassroots sport would be my suggestion as to where it starts, because obviously the volunteer we're going to have no shortage of volunteers. That's still being worked through. That's probably a few years off before they start talking about volunteers. But I think it is about getting behind, and it sounds getting behind the movement is to get big. So we've got Paris in a little while, and we've got some events that we're running locally around Paris. To commemorate the start of the games, the start of the Paralympic Games, some welcome home events. So it is about trying to get involved and getting behind that. But it's also, I think, just talking up the Sunshine Coast and talking up the opportunities that are coming around as a result of being us being a co-host city for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And you'll see programs that there has been a few years where we've just been working through the governance and the budgets and all that kind of boring stuff, but now we're about to get into some really good engagement stuff, and it is groups such as our Sunshine Coast Community Legacy Reference Group. It is Sunshine Coast 2032. So there will be an engagement strategy around that, but I just think for now, if you can do anything, just get involved in sport, get behind sport, grassroots.
Get involved in grassroots sports like the University of Sunshine Coast Barbarian rugby team. Not giving them a plug or anything, but if you get involved for the next 8 years and you want to, these clubs are going to be involved. Like precincts like the University of Sunshine Coast, your local rugby teams. All over the soccer teams, the tennis teams, the croquet teams, even the lacrosse teams now, and things like that. So, if you wanted to get involved with the club, because they are definitely going to be involved with the games.
And it's usually when we go out for events or activities and we look for volunteers, we can never get enough.
Yeah, that's right.
The volunteer program from the Olympic Games, it's going to be competitive. So if you want to get the volunteer T-shirt, which I know the people from Sydney just absolutely loved and are so proud of.
They still meet up.
Yeah. You're actually going to have to have something on your CV. You're not just going to say, listen, I haven't volunteered for anything, but now I want to be a volunteer. Yeah. So get into your local club and start making a difference.
Is the Sunshine Coast Council going to get a passport, a volunteer passport, where you get your stamps for doing all these things that you just said to get your
we
game
haven't
together?
got to that stage, Duncan, but thanks for the idea.
Suggestion box. Put that in the suggestion box.
Good one.
It's the unofficial launch today of it.
Will that land me in Paris? That good idea?
No?
Okay,
I thought you'd be already going.
No, mate.
Yeah. You're watching it from afar.
Mm-hmm. Cheering you on, mate.
And it is actually, it's Paris is, whilst it'll be magnificent, of course, it's not friendly. It's not time friendly for the Australian audience. So if you want to be watching, I don't know, you might be interested in the swimming finals, for example.
Why would you be?
You'll be
4:20 in the morning, mate.
3 o'clock
in the morning. My alarm set already. I can't wait.
4 o'clock in the morning.
What a pump up before breakfast.
Yes.
2 hours of swimming.
Exactly.
And then
right.
you have your breakfast. On with your day.
Yeah. So there is. It depends which way you look at it. It could be time friendly if you're an early riser. And you can do it.
I can't wait.
Yeah. It'll be amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. Over the next 2 months, we're going to be loving the Olympics and Paralympic Games, and I think that excitement, and then into the building phase, will generate so much interest and so much activity, and you'll be jet lagged but happy.
Excited.
With a big smile on your face and a lot of lessons learned from the Paris experience. So enjoy your trip over there. Stay safe. Have a fantastic time, and we can't wait to hear about the ideas that you get around drinking champagne and those, because I'm sure that this centre that you're staying in has a fridge. So I'm sure the champagne will be on ice as soon as you get there. But enjoy yourself over there. Bon voyage. And we can't wait to see the ideas when you get back. Thanks for joining us on the Podium podcast.
Thanks, Duncan. Thanks, Fran.
Thank you.